A K9 police dog bursts into a hospital with two babies on his back. What the doctors and nurses found next left everyone speechless. The night shift at the hospital was never truly quiet. The sound of rushing footsteps on tiled floors, nurses calling out to one another, and the steady rhythmic beeping of machines acted like the familiar breathing of the entire building. People pushed gurneys, opened files, or stole a quick sip of water to stay alert. Everything was moving fast, yet within the usual routine. No one thought that in just a few minutes, the entire hospital would fall into a silence, so deep it was eerie. The automatic glass doors slid open softly as they always did, but what appeared next made everyone freeze. A massive German shepherd, his body covered in dust and dirt, walked in with a heavy gait. His breathing so labored it seemed that one more step would send him collapsing to the floor. But what left everyone speechless wasn't just his appearance. It was what he was carrying on his back. Two newborn babies, tiny, wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket that looked as though it had survived a long journey. Their skin was pale, their lips ashy. Both lay still, moving only slightly with the rhythm of weak breaths. A moment that felt like an eternity passed. No one could utter a word. A nurse stepped back, covering her mouth to stifle a cry. An older doctor furrowed his brow, his steps faltering in the middle of the hallway. The dog, whose name they would later learn was Valor, paid no mind to the panicked stares around him. He looked straight toward the emergency room, as if he knew exactly where he needed to take the little ones. But whenever someone approached too closely, he immediately issued a low growl, not fierce, not threatening, but like a warning from a creature channeling his last ounce of strength to protect what mattered most to him. A security guard whispered to the doctor on duty, Should I take him outside? The doctor shook his head immediately. No, he's asking for help. Look, he's more afraid that we'll hurt the babies. But even understanding this, no one dared to take another step. The situation only changed when Emily stepped out from the end of the hall. Emily was a young nurse with a kind face and a voice as gentle as the wind. Seeing the scene before her, she froze for a few seconds, then immediately ran over. She didn't rush to touch the children. Instead, she slowly lowered herself to the dog's eye level. Hello, buddy, she said softly, as if soothing a frightened child. It's okay. We're here to help. Valor looked at Emily. His eyes were exhausted, yet they still held a glint of wariness. She didn't move closer. She simply waited, extending her hand with the palm open, forcing nothing. A few tense seconds passed. Then the dog let out a soft snort, his stiff shoulders gradually relaxing. He tilted his head to the side, as if allowing Emily to approach the babies. Good boy. Thank you, Emily whispered. The moment she gently lifted the children from his back, Valor tried to keep his balance for a second, and then his whole body went limp. He collapsed right there on the cold tiled floor, eyes half closed, his breathing steady but weak, sustained only by a shred of willpower. Call the pediatric team now. Prep 2 incubators, Emily shouted, breaking the silence for the first time. The hospital instantly sprang into motion. Doctors ran over, nurses prepped equipment, and gurneys were wheeled in. The two babies were rushed into the ER within seconds, while Valor was placed aside, resting in the arms of a veterinary staff member. But even while exhausted to the point of being unable to lift his head, Valor's eyes still tried to follow the two small carts taking the babies away. That gaze was filled with worry, as if he feared that if he looked away for even a second, harm would befall them. Emily stood by the dog, placing a hand on his head, her voice trembling with emotion. Where did you bring them from, buddy? And what happened to them? Valor couldn't answer. He just breathed wearily, but his eyes said everything. The journey he had just survived was certainly not an easy one. And that was the beginning of a story no one in the hospital that night could have expected. The emergency room was always bright at night, but the moment the twins were brought in, that light became urgent. Emily pushed through the doors, calling out, her voice shaking with anxiety. Two small incubators were ready, Doctors and nurses stood around a resuscitation table, everyone holding their breath. The children were so small, perhaps only a few weeks old. The doctor gently placed each baby on the table, every movement careful as if handling fragile sprouts. Immediately, monitors were attached to check their heart rates, breathing, and temperature. "Temperature is very low," the doctor exclaimed. "We need to warm them up immediately." A nurse quickly adjusted the temperature in the incubators. Meanwhile, Emily stood close by, observing every tiny detail. And that was when she noticed the first strange thing. On the baby girl's wrist, there were small indentations, faint but distinct enough to make her frown. "Doctor, look at this," Emily said, her voice low but urgent. The doctor leaned in, his experienced eyes immediately recognizing something was wrong. "These aren't normal marks. Not from bumping into something. It looks like they were bound by something." Hearing this, Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She moved to check the baby boy and found the same thing, a long indentation running along his wrist and arm. Before she could process it, another nurse cried out. There are mud traces on the boy's back. The girl's legs, too. Patches of mud had dried into small streaks. Forest soil, the kind that is dark, dry, and has a distinct smell that anyone who has walked through the woods would recognize. The doctor stood silent. For a few seconds, he turned to check the girl's legs and back. The result was the same. Small, clumping patches of dirt lingered on their skin. They weren't put down somewhere clean before being wrapped in a blanket, the doctor said. These aren't children abandoned in the usual way. Someone took these babies from a place that should have been safe. Hearing this, Emily's throat tightened. These tiny children, what had they been through? But why were they on a dog's back? A nurse wondered aloud. And why did the dog come to the hospital at exactly the right time? The question silenced the room. No one had the answer, but they all felt that something very big was hiding behind this. While the ER worked urgently, out in the hallway, a veterinarian was examining the dog that had brought the babies in. The large dog lay still, exhausted, but his eyes still occasionally drifted toward the doors where the children were being treated. The vet gently stroked Valor's fur, then used a small device to scan his neck. A beep sounded. A string of code appeared on the screen. The vet squinted to read it, and her expression changed. Completely. My God, she whispered. A security guard nearby asked immediately, What is it? The vet swallowed hard before speaking slowly. He has a chip, and according to the system, this is K9 Valor. K9? You mean a police dog? Yes. And she flipped the information page to the notes. Valor was reported missing almost 2 weeks ago during a raid on a group specializing in kidnapping young children. The air around them seemed to freeze. 2 security guards stood motionless. A doctor passing by heard this and stopped in his tracks. So that means the dog didn't run away. He wasn't lost. He was still on the mission, the guard stammered. The vet nodded slightly. Look at the dirt on him. He's traveled very far, for a long time. And he brought those 2 children straight to the hospital, the only place that could save them in time. A few doctors stepped out of the ER just in time to hear the story, and they were stunned. They turned back to look at the doors behind them, where the 2 babies had just been placed in incubators, and then back at Valor, who was lying there panting. This dog, a nurse said, her voice trembling with emotion, clearly didn't appear here by accident. He carried those babies a long way, the vet continued. Just looking at him, you can tell he went through incredible hardship, yet he still managed to keep the children safe on his back. Emily stepped out just in time to hear the last sentence. She stood in the doorway, her hands still shaking slightly, her eyes moist after the tense minutes in the ER. When her gaze landed on Valor's exhausted body, her throat tightened. He really saved them? Emily asked softly. Not just saved, the vet replied, her voice warm and low. He protected those 2 lives with everything he had. If not for him, the babies wouldn't have made it here in time. Everyone around fell silent. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they were feeling something profound. This dog had done something far beyond instinct. He had done something only a heart capable of love could do. bringing two tiny lives to safety with every ounce of his strength. And as the first reports were sent to hospital administration and then forwarded to the police night watch, the entire building quickly sank into a different atmosphere. Anxiety mixed with the realization that this was no small incident. A silent truth was gradually being revealed, and it all started with the traces of forest mud on the skin of two babies. The hospital's temporary veterinary treatment room was lit continuously that night. Valor lay on a clean mattress, his breathing still heavy. The vet gently examined every part of his body, long scratches running down his back, and ribs became clearer under the light. They weren't critical, but they were enough to show the dog had traversed a rugged journey. There are teeth marks from some animal here, the vet said quietly, touching the area around a wound. Not deep, but he must have been startled and run very fast. Emily stood nearby, listening to every word. She didn't know much about veterinary medicine, but seeing the crisscrossing scratches on his coat made her heart ache. Clearly, Valor had gone through dangerous terrain. Forest thorns, sharp rocks, thick brush, all leaving their mark. Another nurse brought a file over, reading aloud. The muscle groups in his hind legs are severely strained, likely from carrying something heavy over a long distance. Emily looked down at Valor's legs. The fur there was matted with dirt and dry leaves. She murmured, "The babies are so small, yet he still carried them." The vet nodded, her voice somber. With a body in this condition, he had to push himself incredibly hard to make it here. The reality was this. Valor had been part of a mission to find missing persons with the K9 unit. During an operation about 2 weeks ago, he vanished into a vast forest. At the time, everyone thought he had been injured and lost his team, unable to return. But the truth was far different. A hazy image formed in Emily's imagination like a slow-motion film. Valor running through the dense jungle, his ears constantly tuning into distant sounds. Somewhere, he heard a very faint, weak cry, the cry of newborns. He turned toward that sound. In memories pieced together from the marks on Valor's body, Emily could visualize the dog weaving through thickets, his back and shoulders snagging on thorns, leaving long scratches. There were times he slipped on rocks, but he stood back up, refusing to give up. Finally, he found a small hut. Inside, two children lay in an old blanket, shivering, their faces exhausted. Valor couldn't speak, but his instinct understood. If they stayed here any longer, the babies wouldn't survive. He gently gripped the edge of the blanket, pulling it close to keep them warm. Then he lowered himself, letting the babies lean against his broad back. Only when both were stable did he stand up, and a long journey began. Valor couldn't run fast because of the two small lives on his back. He took steady steps, keeping his back level, even though his hind legs sometimes trembled with fatigue. Sometimes he had to crawl through narrow, rocky crevices, tilting his body slightly so the babies wouldn't slide off. Sometimes he had to wade through small streams. The cold water made his muscles cramp, but he held his head high, ensuring the babies didn't get wet. As darkness fell, the strange sounds of the forest put him on high alert, relying on his trained instincts. He always chose the long way around, avoiding any place with strange noises. After traveling a long distance, Valor's legs began to go numb. But every time he heard the weak breathing of the babies. Behind him, he pushed a little further. Dawn approached, but Valor's strength was nearly gone. It was then he saw the hospital lights in the distance. The light was small, but to a dog that had traveled so far for so long, it was like a promise that the journey was ending. Valor walked faster, though he swayed more with every step. Each footfall felt weighted down. His entire body was so tired he just wanted to lie down and rest right there. But he didn't. He knew that only if he reached the hospital would the children have a chance to live. When he passed through the hospital doors, all his remaining strength vanished. He only managed to see Emily rushing toward him, her hands carefully taking the babies. And then Valor fell, right at the threshold where he had placed his final hope. Inside the temporary vet room, Valor lay still on the soft mattress, and Fordrip swaying gently above him in the breeze of the ceiling fan. Emily sat beside him, stroking his matted fur, her mind still reeling from the journey this dog had overcome. Just as things seemed to be settling, Valor suddenly sprang up. It wasn't a jump from pain or fear. He stood up in the manner of a service dog who had been on duty for too long. Fast, decisive, and fully alert. Emily was startled. Valor, easy now, you're not well yet. Valor didn't respond. He pointed his head toward the door, ears pricked, eyes focused as if looking through the long corridor. A small sound escaped his throat. Not a growl, not a threat, but an urgent call. Emily understood immediately. He wants to go back to where it happened. Minutes later, when the police arrived and heard Emily's explanation, everyone was ready. An officer looked at Valor and said, "If he found the babies himself, he can definitely lead us back." Valor was taken off the floor, but the doctors insisted they bring medical support because his condition was unstable. However, the moment his paws touched the ground, he immediately walked quickly toward the back exit of the hospital, the direction leading to the forest. That night, flashlight beams cut long streaks through the darkness, shimmering on leaves in the ground. Valor led the group with a determined gait, despite his fatigue. Emily walked right behind him, filled with worry, but she trusted that Valor knew what he was doing. Before long, the group stopped by a large tree. Valor lowered his head, sniffed the dirt, and gave a short bark. An officer knelt to check. "Here it is, rope identical to the kind found on the baby's wrists. There's a piece of the blanket here, too," another called out. They looked at each other, saying nothing, but they all understood. The babies had been here. Valor continued. This time he walked a bit slower, as if trying to maintain his balance, but he refused to stop. A while later, a police flashlight swept across the ground and paused. "What is this?" A long dark streak was imprinted on the dirt. One look was enough to understand it was the mark of a large body dragging itself along. Emily bent down, her voice trembling. It might be from when. Valor slipped and dragged his legs. The dog's breathing ahead became audible, but he didn't turn his head. He wanted to keep going. The forest gradually opened into a small clearing with an old, dilapidated hut. The wooden walls were rotting, the roof askew, the door hanging off its hinges. Police shone their lights inside. In the middle of the room was a broken cradle. Beside it, a crumpled piece of paper had been blown by the wind. An officer picked it up, scanned it, and looked up. "This is a timeline note. Looks like a movement schedule." Emily felt a chill despite the humid night air. On the ground were large, fresh footprints, pressed into the dry leaves as if someone had left not long ago. "He's still nearby," an officer whispered. Just then, Valor barked, loudly, the sound echoing in the silent night. He ran toward the edge of the woods, up a slope leading to a rocky hill in the distance. The police immediately sprinted after him. The pursuit in the night was frantic. Flashlights swept over bushes. Heavy footsteps thudded on the trail. Valor was always ahead, his legs straining, occasionally buckling from exhaustion. But whenever he seemed about to stop, he heard the police whistle behind him and kept running. Near the foot of the rocky hill, the police spotted a silhouette trying to climb up. The figure turned, looking for an escape route, but the flashlight beams had him surrounded. Valor barked again, confirming that this was exactly where they needed to be. Minutes later, the radio crackled clearly. "Suspect secured. Repeat. Suspect secured." Emily stood at the bottom of the hill, hand on her chest, breathing a sigh of relief. But when she looked over at Valor, he was slowly sitting down, then laying completely flat on the ground. He hadn't fainted, but clearly the last of his strength was leaving his body. An officer placed a hand on Emily's shoulder, speaking softly. He finished the mission, hearing the radio. Again, the voice decisive. "The two little ones are safe." Valor closed his eyes, his breathing slowing, as if he finally allowed himself to rest after a journey that had exceeded his limits. After 6 hours of intensive care, the neonatal unit felt as though a heavy weight had been lifted. The charts that had previously kept everyone tense were now stabilizing. The babies' heart rates were stronger and clearer, their temperatures were warming, and their breathing was steady. Emily stood by the incubator, clasping her hands in emotion. The pressure of the night melted away when the doctor announced that both babies had passed the most critical stage. Emily leaned down, whispering against the glass of the incubator. "You two are so brave. Truly brave." The two children lay, side by side, leaning slightly toward each other like two thin leaves relying on one another for warmth. Seeing that, Emily suddenly remembered Valor, the dog who had carried them the entire way. He was still lying in the temporary vet room, on and four, resting. Thinking of the look in his eyes when he watched the babies before collapsing, Emily felt a pang in her heart. She turned to the attending physician. "I want to bring Valor in to see the babies. Just for a moment. I think it's important for all three of them." The doctor looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but be careful. He's still very weak." Emily smiled, feeling as though she had just received permission for something more necessary than anyone could understand. When she entered the vet room, she saw Valor lying on his side, eyes half open. Despite his exhaustion, his gaze was strangely warm. He recognized Emily's footsteps immediately and slightly lifted his head, though even that small movement made him breathe harder than usual. "Time to see the babies again," Emily said, her voice light as a breeze. "Shall we?" Valor couldn't stand, but his legs moved as if to say he was ready. Two support staff brought a small gurney, gently placing Valor on it. Emily walked alongside, one hand steadying his head. As they pushed the gurney down the long corridor, other medical staff stopped to watch, their faces filled with gratitude and affection for this special dog. The door to the neonatal care unit opened with a soft click. Inside, the light was dim, tailored for the tiny beings. Emily gently pushed the gurney close to the incubator. And then, a miracle happened. Just hearing the sound of wheels rolling on the floor, the two newborns stirred simultaneously. The boy turned his head toward the sound. The girl lifted her hand as if searching for something familiar. When Emily opened the incubator lid and brought Valor's gurney closer, both babies instinctively leaned forward, their tiny hands reaching toward Valor as if recognizing the warmth that had saved them in the cold forest night. Valor, though tired, tried to prop himself up on his front legs to inch closer to the bed. His legs were shaking. Emily could see it clearly, but he didn't want to lie down. He wanted to see the children he had brought to peace. Emily placed her hand under his belly to support him, helping him stand steady. Valor took a gentle breath, lowered his head very slowly, and touched his forehead to the baby's foreheads, a light touch like a greeting, a confirmation that, "You two are safe. The humans here will take care of you for me." The room fell silent. No one could speak. No one wanted to break the moment. The babies stopped crying, their eyes fluttering open, their breathing settling as they felt the familiar scent. The baby girl touched Valor's nose. The baby boy placed his whole hand on the soft fur between the dog's eyes. Valor closed his eyes and let out a long exhale, not from fatigue, but as if letting go of the tension after a long night fighting for two small lives. Emily covered her mouth, tears welling up. An officer standing in the corner, witnessing it all, had to turn away to hide his emotions. Then he spoke, his voice choked. He didn't just save them. He belongs to them. No one disagreed, because everyone could feel it. Amidst the sterile white hospital room, with no noise, just three beings, a resilient dog and two tiny children, finding each other again. No words needed. No explanation needed. The warmth from those touches was enough for them to understand each other. Valor finally grew tired, his body gently sinking down, his head resting right next to the incubator. Emily supported him, letting him lie still. The babies still turned toward him, their tiny hands unwilling to let go. In that moment, Emily realized there are bonds created not by words, not by papers, but by devotion and a love that transcends the limits of a dog. And as she watched Valor's eyes gently close, still facing the babies as if to reassure them until the very last second. Emily understood that the dark night in the forest wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a journey for Valor to find his own family. A family he had chosen with all his heart. The morning after that tumultuous night, the hospital seemed brighter than usual. Sunlight from the tall windows streamed across the floor, so gentle it made everyone passing by feel a sense of calm. The news that the twins had woken up spread through the medical staff, and just hours later, bigger news broke. The police officially announced they had dismantled a newborn trafficking ring based on the clues Valor had led them to in the night. A police officer stood in the hospital lobby, speaking at a brief press conference. If not for this dog, we probably wouldn't have tracked them down so quickly. Valor opened the door to the entire case. Those present applauded, eyes filled with emotion. They looked toward the end of the hall, where the door to the veterinary care room was ajar, and a small gurney sat beside it. Valor was lying there, his coat brushed clean, his wounds carefully bandaged. He was much more alert, though still tired. But his eyes were incredibly bright and gentle, especially when he saw the two children. The hospital decided to do something to honor Valor's bravery. A small ceremony was held right in the lobby, warm and simple. No long speeches, just sincere appreciation for this special dog. Emily was the first to push Valor's gurney into the center of the lobby. When the applause rang out, he startled slightly, then lay still, as if sensing this moment was for him. The twins were brought out shortly after, each wrapped in a soft towel, their faces much rosier than the night before. When they got close to Valor, the unexpected happened again. The two babies simultaneously reached out toward the dog. Though very small, the reflex was enough to choke everyone up. Emily leaned down, placing the babies next to Valor on the large blanket. Immediately, two tiny hands gripped the soft fur on the dog's neck, as if finding a familiar warmth. Valor tilted his head, his nose gently touching each baby's forehead, then lay still as if ready to embrace them both. The hospital lobby fell into a silence, so beautiful no one dared disturb it. An officer standing next to Emily whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't just save the babies, he chose to stay with them. Emily smiled. She understood this better than anyone. That dark night in the forest, Valor had no reason to keep going. He was tired, he was in pain, he could have stopped. But he didn't. He took step after step, solely for the weak breathing of those two tiny beings. So today, seeing the three of them lying together, like this, she saw it even more clearly. Valor hadn't just saved the children's lives. He had given his whole heart to them. During the ceremony, they presented Valor with a small medal that sparkled under the lights. When it was clipped to his collar, everyone applauded again. Valor opened his eyes and looked around, his tail giving a slight wag in response. After the ceremony, Emily took Valor and the babies back to the special care room. In that quiet room, she spread a large fluffy towel over the wide hospital bed. Valor was lifted to lie in the middle, with the babies placed on either side. The three of them looked like a picture of a peaceful family that anyone would want to touch. The babies clutched Valor's fur, their eyes closed in complete trust. Valor closed his eyes too, his breathing steady like a lullaby. No words were spoken, but the peace spread so palpably that Emily stood watching, tears threatening to fall. After everything, she whispered, everything is finally bright again. The sentence wasn't meant for anyone in particular, but it felt like it was for the long night the three had endured. A thin blanket was pulled up gently. Emily sat down nearby, watching the three small lives leaning on each other for warmth, and in that moment, she knew that life sometimes holds miracles that don't require dazzling lights or loud music. Some miracles come only from footsteps driven to exhaustion, from breaths held tight and never let go, from a heart that knows how to love more than it cares for itself. Valor didn't need to say a word. The babies couldn't speak either. But the bond between those three beings was as clear as day to everyone. On the white hospital bed, under the warm afternoon light, Valor lay in the middle, The babies nestled on either side, falling asleep in each other's breath. A picture of peace, a beautiful period at the end of a journey that seemed impossible, and a gentle reminder to us all. There are heroes who need no words. There are miracles that don't come from magic, but from a heart that knows how to love more than it feels. Pain,